Is that it? Did we do it? Let's go, baby. Let's go. Credits. Love it. All right. Let's talk about the ups and downs of Deathbound, shall we? So first off, I want to start by saying that Souls-likes... What is this noise? Souls-likes are one of my favorite genres. It has an argument for being my favorite genre. So it doesn't take much for me to enjoy one. I pretty much always enjoy them. There are just a couple of exceptions ever. So I was pretty sure I was going to enjoy this, especially once I got into it a little bit and realized, like, this is a real Souls-like. There have been a lot of games I've played recently that have Souls-like elements, but aren't really Souls-likes. Flintlock: The Siege of Dawn, Rise of the Ronin, Tales of Iron, games with Souls-like elements, but it's like, yeah, they maybe have slow, deliberate combat, but they don't have a universal leveling system, or they don't have bonfires, or maybe they don't have a stamina system, or maybe they don't have, whatever, fill in the blank. This game has all of that. It has the universal leveling currency, it has the corpse run, it has the slow, deliberate combat, it's got it all. It's the bonfires, it's the whole package. This is what I would call a true Souls-like. First of all, love that. I know that Blueprint is a little played recently, but I still love it. And I think overall this game does an excellent job. I think overall this is I'm going to go ahead and go as far as to say that this is a great game. It's not a masterpiece. It's not perfect. It's got some definite, obvious flaws, but I think it transcends those enough. The good points of this game transcended enough that this is an excellent game. And let me tell you why. So the base, when it comes to the basics, level design, exploration, leveling, level progression, the skill tree is awesome. The combat is mostly satisfying. I have a couple of nitpicks, but it's mostly very satisfying. Just the basics are there for a good, if you like real Souls-likes, like the FromSoft games, like Dark Souls, Demon Souls, Bloodborne, games like Chronos Before the Ashes, Steel Rising, Thymesia. These are real Souls-likes, right? They've got everything about them. The only thing about this that's not really Souls-like is that the levels are fairly linear. It's pretty linear. There's a little bit of backtracking, but it's mostly pretty linear. But outside of that, it's very much a Souls-like, and it's a very good one. It's got some good boss fights. Again, we'll get to more of that in a second, but it's got some good boss fights. It's got good combat. But what really makes this game stand out is the class-changing system, the party-based system, I believe is how it's been referred to by the developers, where if you've ever played Mortal Shell, it's a lot like that, where you've got different, basically, classes that you can equip that have different, totally different types. It's like classes. Like there's like a mage, there's a crusader, there's a monk, there's a rogue. It's most of them actually are quite standard classes. Like it's very obviously a certain class. There are a couple of exceptions, but and you pick them up as you go throughout the game. So you start with one, and then an hour into the game, maybe you'll get a second one, and then another hour you get a third one, and it just goes on like that until you have all of them. It's no, we're not going to touch that. It's and it is. So if you ever played Mortal Shell, it's interesting to have those different types of builds. But this goes way further than Mortal Shell. Mortal Shell, it's the same move set. They just have better certain perks about them that make them better in certain situations. These are completely different classes. And more importantly, you can change... In Mortal Shell, you had to go to a bonfire if you wanted to switch between one and the other, and then you were stuck with that one until you either died or you got to another bonfire. This game, you change it on the fly. You just pick with the D-pad which one you want to be. And you can have up to 4 equipped at a time. And it is fun as hell to roll up on a group of enemies, start out with a ranged guy who's shooting poison at them. And then once they get closer, you switch to your enemy that does, or your character that does a lot of bleed damage with their lance. And you're lancing them. And then when you get a good bleed damage in, you switch to your rogue and they're doing poison damage with their daggers. And then to do the final kill, you switch to your heavy hitter with his giant hammer, and you do that all against one enemy, and it's a lot of fun. And then in boss fights, it's crazy, especially later in the game when you've got so many to juggle between. I'm doing a couple of moves, and then I'm switching to a different class, and it's important to switch because they all have their own health and stamina too. So you exhaust the stamina on one, and then you switch to another one, exhaust the stamina on that one. Or if they get hit a few times, then you switch back. And when you're doing damage with one, it's doing lifesteal for all the others. So it's important. There's no real healing system in this game. That's another thing. There's no Estus flask or anything like that. There's something that's kind of like it, but it just redistributes health among your characters. It's not like it just heals you. There are a couple of consumable items that do that, but there's not really healing in this game. The way you heal is you switch to one of your characters that's still high on health, do a bunch of damage, and then that heals your other characters. So you can get by indefinitely as long as you're doing enough damage and not taking too much. And that's a lot of fun to manage. I really, really enjoyed managing that. It's a really cool idea. I've never seen it done quite that way before. And I really, really thought it was a lot of fun, especially when you're in the heat of like a boss battle and you're just switching in between. It's a lot of fun to do that. And they all have their own moves, so they're all very different. The classes are very different, way more than something like Mortal Shell. So I loved that. And that's probably the heart of what makes this game great. I think that's the best thing about it, and it's a pillar of the game, is switching between those characters is a lot of fun, managing all their abilities, exploring levels, and just getting into fights with random enemies, and switching between your classes, and then finding the boss of the area, and then doing all of that. That's a lot of fun, and it's at the heart of what I really, really loved about this game. Is the combat when you're in it is a lot of fun. Well, I touched on a few things. The skill tree is really cool because it's almost kind of a Path of Exile thing, but not nearly as complicated, where it's got your different characters in different parts of the skill tree, and you can, if you put into this thing, it doesn't just benefit that character, but it benefits the stats that is important to that character, like maybe blocking or poise or ranged damage, depending on who it is, or spell casting. So the skill tree was really awesome. Again, the level design was fairly linear, but for a linear type Souls-like, I thought it was quite good. There's a lot of open up the shortcut so you can get back to the bonfire kind of situations, and that's always satisfying to find those doors that you can circle back to and rest. All that's there. Lies of P was another game that was really good at that too, with the level design and circling back and finding shortcuts. This has a lot of that. If you liked Lies of P level design, it was very similar, I thought. All right, so let's talk about some critiques. The combat is a little bit wonky in some spots. It's not too bad. There are some games like Withering Rooms is a really good example of there's not really a good blocking system or dodging system, so you're just kind of always taking damage, and so it's really just about who can kill who first. There's a little tinge of that in this game because some of the tougher enemies and some of the bosses, they don't stagger, so even if you find a window to attack, like if you wait for them to attack, dodge it, or block it, or whatever, and then attack, they're going to attack again right after that, so you're just going to get hit. There's a little bit of that. I will admit I didn't get really into the parrying in this game. Sometimes I do get into parrying, and sometimes I don't. This game, it didn't seem as important, so I didn't really, and it was hard. The parrying window is tight in this game, so I just didn't bother. I just focused on dodging, and that worked out for me. But without any of that knowledge, it seemed to me like it's not really about avoiding damage in this game. It's about doing enough damage that you're healing your other characters so that you're keeping enough health despite taking damage. And that's okay. That's not bad. It's just it's not quite as satisfying when you feel like you can't really master a fight. There probably is a way to do it, especially with parrying, but like, how do you do no damage runs in games like that? You know, I like knowing that there's a way that it could be done. Like, I could totally kick a boss's ass and not take any damage. I'll never get that good at a single game, but I like feeling like that could be possible. And in a lot of Souls-likes, that does feel the case. It doesn't really feel like that here, but it's baked into the premise. It's because of the way that this game is designed. It's not really, this game rewards aggression because damage is healing. So that's your only real healing. But that was a little frustrating at times. It's like, well, I couldn't have avoided damage there, so he killed me because I went into that with that character and he was too low on health, and that was the mistake I made. It's not that I could have dodged better or something. As far as the boss fights in this game go, I think the boss fights are actually one of the weaker spots of this game. There have been a lot of quasi-Souls-likes I've played lately that, like, the bosses are the highlights. Tales of Iron, Flintlock, The Siege of Dawn. Those games have some problems, but the boss fights are where they really shine. I don't feel like that with this game. I feel like where they really shine is when you're just dealing with the levels. There were a couple bosses that I thought were very good, but again, I kept falling into this trap of like, well, there's not really any way to take damage, so I just have to see if I can damage them faster than they can damage me, so that I can heal my other characters, and it just ends up being a little bit of just a race to who can break the other glass cannon first. So I thought that was a little frustrating with the bosses. Some of the bosses I just thought were formatted strangely, maybe even badly. There's a gank fight in this. And it was the hardest boss in the game. Usually the hardest boss in a Souls-like is my favorite. The hardest boss in this game was not my favorite. It was definitely my least favorite because you're fighting two and they're just cornering you. Another issue was there were some crazy difficulty spikes in this game. Actually, there was one major difficulty spike about a third of the way through. If you've ever played Thymesia, which is another short but very good Souls-like, very hard. In certain areas of that game, it's like every enemy you come across is no slouch. And they're, but in the second level, it's like every enemy is just brutal to get through, and you're getting through by the skin of your teeth. This game has that, where it's like suddenly you're in this new area, and it's like, there are no regular enemies. Every enemy is basically a mini-boss. There were 2 times in this game where it did that. And when it gets to the point where when you see a regular enemy or even a mob of regular enemies, it's a fucking mercy, because it's like, good, I don't have to. It's basically mini boss after mini boss after mini boss. And it's hard, man, because you're carrying a bunch of XP around that you don't want to lose if you die. And you've been going for a while. And then you look down an alleyway and you see 3 giant enemies in a row. And it's like, how am I going to should I just turn around and go turn in my XP? And have to fight through the 3 mini bosses I already killed. It's not necessarily a critique, but I do think it's less than ideal to have these huge difficulty spikes. I think the best Souls-likes are a little bit better at pacing. Like, they'll really put you through the ringer for a couple of enemies or for a stretch of time, and then they'll give you a little bit of a break, and it kind of blends together a little bit better. This game was like, the second area, I didn't die once outside of the boss fight. And then the third area, I could not stop dying. So there was just a little bit of a balance issue there. Also, we talked about the boss fights. We talked about the difficulty spikes. There were some bugs. The game crashed on me a couple of times. So there's an issue where when you're often fighting more than one thing all the time in this game. The camera is just all over the place. So if you're fighting one thing, it's probably fine. You're locked onto them, whatever, your camera will follow them, unless you get like in a corner or something. But like if you're fighting 2 or more, good luck. Because even if you're just focused on one, the guy that's in your periphery over here is affecting the camera too. And it's just nuts. You just kind of have to see it. The camera is pretty bad, I would actually say. Like Demon Souls kind of bad, you know, where it's just like jank and it's kind of just going over. It's like, oh, suddenly I'm in a wall and I can't see anything. Or it's like the enemy is between my character and the camera and I can't see. There's a lot of that. And the camera just whips around like crazy. There's a boss fight where there's multiple targets on the boss that you can lock onto. Every time you change the lock on, it's like, well, first of all, it's hard to even do that. But beyond that, every time you change it, it's like the camera will just go, what? It doesn't really need to do that. It just needs to change here to here. But the camera doesn't really understand the lock on. It just gets a little crazy sometimes. And then if you're fighting more than one enemy, it's very easy for you to get stuck in corners, stuck in walls. There's like a fucking vase next to the wall, and the 2 enemies are right here, and you'll dodge into the vase. And then it seems like you can dodge past it or through it or around it, but you just can't. And it's like, the vase is like 2 feet away from me, and I still just can't dodge. Like the dodge isn't going anywhere. And because the hitbox on this fucking vase is like, has forgotten its place. There's a lot of that. So you don't want to get trapped in corners. But there's a lot of areas in this game where it's just I said the level design was great. I have to add an asterisk to that. There are lots of times where you're just in a hallway. Because you're in a modern setting in this game where you're just like in an office building. And you're fighting these giant enemies. And you don't have any room to move around. And the camera doesn't either. And it's a lot of the camera just not knowing what the fuck it's doing. So there's a lot of narrow passages and alleyways and hallways and things like that in this game that it's just rough to get through. But that brings me, and I'll end here. That brings me back to one thing I haven't talked about this thing that's good. This game that's good. So this game does that thing where it's like, oh, you're like medieval dressed like knights and stuff, like you're like medieval looking, but you're in a modern setting where you're in like an office building or a city, and there's like Toyotas burning that you're walking by. I've seen that before in games, but this game started with that premise. It's very like, if you've played Chronos Before the Ashes or even Remnant, it's a little bit like that. But this game with the story takes it in a very interesting direction from there. The backdrop that it starts off with, it's interesting, but I've seen it before. But the story that evolves when you're figuring out like why you're linked with all these characters and you can switch between them and like like the histories behind all of them. The story goes in some very interesting places. I wouldn't call it one of the best Souls-like stories I've ever seen or anything, but it is interesting. A lot of times in a Souls-like, the story is just like, whatever, who cares? And this game was able to transcend that, and I thought that was really cool. All right, I'll shut up about it. I think overall, I think this is a great game. When it comes to where I'm going to rank it, the question that I was asking myself toward the end was, is this the best Souls-like I've played of 2024? Is this the best Souls-like of 2024? And really the only thing that's in the way of that statement is Another Crab's Treasure, because that game was amazing. I don't think I liked it quite. I reserve the right to change my mind when I actually rank it, but I don't think that I liked it quite as much as Another Crab's Treasure. Another Crab's Treasure was very flawed too, but overall it was excellent. And I think the boss fights were better. The overall combat was probably better. So it's just going to be a matter of whether I can weigh that against the whole like morphing in and out of class thing, because that's something that this brings to the table that game really didn't. It had the shell system, but so I'm going to have to think about it. But this game is going to rank high. Souls-likes usually do, but this one's going to rank up there. I really, really liked it. I think I might have liked it more than Mortal Shell. I'll have to think about it. But I really, really, really enjoyed this game. All right, last order of business. No, we're not starting a new game cycle. We have seen the credits. That's all we need to see. So Deathbound, it has been fun. A lot of fun. But we are now going to delete you from our console and never play you again. Bye! Thank you. You were awesome. Love you. Peace.